right, so I've been trying to get some time to make a video to help people 3D print their RC airplanes, and specifically within using active foaming lightweight PLA. So before I get started, I'm not an expert. I'm really not. I have been 3D printing for over 10 years. Lightweight PLA is new to me. I haven't had a need for it. It's usually used in RC airplanes or cosplay, and I don't do cosplay, and I've only been flying RC airplanes since last August, so we're talking 7-8 months. Sure, I've been doing RC for decades, but pretty much just cars, and then I got into boats, and then recently planes. The planes we're looking at here are Kyle's designs. He's got a Facebook group, Cults 3D link, so on and so forth. I'm going to go over why specifically I'm talking about Kyle's, but this applies to any designer prints or anything you're doing for RC airplanes, as long as you're using active lightweight foaming. There's some tips in here that I've discovered, and I just wanted to share those today. So for what it's worth, here I use Bamboo Studio is what we're looking at, and I have a Bamboo Labs P1S with AMS. So with that, you get different colors. That's not really part of this video, although there's a little bit of subject on that will create more stringing. You can see I got a print going on right now. It's going to be done in 19 minutes, so hopefully I can wrap this up, get that off the build plate, and get another print started. I'm not going to give you some tips that will completely eliminate stringing. What I'm trying to do is eliminate high stringing. So this is what I started out with. And what these settings here were is basic PLA settings, and then and decrease the flow rate to, I think here I was looking at 0.65, and my temperature was 250 degrees Celsius. I've since changed that and have quite a bit, in my eyes, much better stringing. This was a current print. This has some defects because I forgot to turn my fan off on my P1S. There's an auxiliary fan, and if you leave it on, you're going to get some artifacts, some visual artifacts. And so I left it on. So ignore the visual artifacts, but the stringing is quite a bit less. And the stringing you do see is much easier to clean up than what I was previously having to deal with, which was this. And I'll go over that in a little bit. But let me set a goal here. I'm trying to print planes as fast as I can because there's a lot of great designers out there. I've been printing a lot of Kyle's designs lately. These are all Kyle's. His designs I like because they're easy to fly, super fast to print, super great designs. Like, they have all the authority and everything you would want in an RC plane, at least from me being a beginner's point of view. Absolutely. Probably even a little too much. And so that's great. So you got easier to fly planes, to certainly beasts, and everywhere in between with his designs. I also like his designs though because they're super fast to print and super fast to assemble. Very well thought out process as far as being able to print as much as you can at one time, given an average build plate size and very few parts to glue together. And the electronics, plenty of room for them in there, so you're not having to worry about those types of things. So I'm going to go over a lot of the settings I do for Kyle's. If I'm printing something like an Eclipse on or something, they're going to use a vase mode or prefer a vase mode. Sometimes I'll do vase mode. Vase mode's great. You're limited to one print at a time. I like to load up my plates and go away and kind of respect my time. But if you want the cleanest prints possible, you're either going to print vase mode or one part at a time. And you're going to get a lot less stringing with that. But now you're going to have to go to your 3D printer every 20 minutes to an hour to pull the part off and put a new one on, especially if you have a faster printer. You're making lots of trips to your printer. I like to load up my plates and print as much as I can at one time. Unless I'm doing colors, I'll kind of separate them by colors. So as you can see here, I'm printing one of Kyle's newest designs, and I've got it separated by color. So my reds, my blues, my blacks, and then I AMS the whites. I did a little color variation. I try and not do that too many color swaps because it really increases the amount of time drastically, at least with the Bamboo Labs. Sure, you get that ability to do multiple colors, but I've had prints that normally take 50 minutes take over 10 hours just from color swaps. So adding color swaps definitely slows things down, and there are ways to improve that too, but still at this point I'm trying to get a plane in the air, make it look pretty fancy, but do those settings. So on to how do we eliminate stringing. So there's really two ways to do it. The first is your settings in your slicer, and the second one is going to be the orientation of how you have things laid out. Within the settings of the slicer, it's mostly going to be around the filament. There are going to be some other settings that definitely help, but the first is your flow ratio and your temperature. The two of those decide how much and how hot it's coming out of your hot end. And the whole reason lightweight PLA active foaming specifically works is it sublimates when it gets heated up. Sublimation is a process where gas gets created, and in the case of lightweight PLA, that gas replaces plastic, and air is lighter than plastic, so you get a much lighter print as a result without sacrificing strength, right? We want to keep strength, but we want to decrease weight. So lightweight foaming in the active foaming variety is a great way to do that. My prints can come out between 30%, I think the highest I've ever seen is like 45% of the weight of regular PLA. So it's considerably lighter than regular PLA, but it is a little weaker. It's maybe 80% of the strength or 90% of the strength. So slight strength degradation, but much improved weight reduction. And that's what we want, especially in RC airplanes. So this ratio that we're seeing, or not, I shouldn't say ratio, this flow rate and this temperature decides how our prints come out. I have used 260, it works great. 265 seems to be my sweet spot in my particular printer. Even if you have the exact same printer as me, you might see some different settings on here. Also depends on how old your printer is, what version your firmware is, so on and so forth. But these settings in particular work for me. There is another setting that I would highly recommend. So turn on retraction. I'm using 1.8 millimeter retraction, and I'm also using a 40 millimeter per second retraction speed. Does not eliminate, but it definitely improves when you do this. Z-hop, I generally leave as auto. Sometimes I'll leave it on if I'm printing a lot of tall, skinny things. As it moves between objects, the hot end, it will Z-hop, so it'll give some distance. That way you don't knock a print over as easy, but I generally leave that to auto and let Bamboo Studio figure that out for me. So that's most of the settings that are really going to help with stringing are right there. The second part, and I'm going to come back to settings and talk about a few in a second, but I want to talk about the main thing to help eliminate stringing. It's not just the settings, it's the layout. So I typically will load up all my plates before I start printing. That way I can figure out what colors I'm going to do, what I can print together, so on and so forth. In this case, there's not a lot of parts to this plane. Normally I have my plates really loaded up to the max. In this case, not so much. And let's talk about this one plate in particular. So the white with the red and blue. So these are elevons and tails in this example. And most slicers will arrange the objects on the plate. So get them close to the middle, close together, so on and so forth. And Bamboo Studio also does that. If you do this, it's going to do it on all plates. Bamboo Studio, at least in particular, if you do Shift A, it'll do just the highlighted plate, so I'll show you that in a second. But one thing I do want to mention is this is off by default, I believe, auto rotate for arrangement, and I would highly recommend that's on. Let me show you what happens with it off. So I'm going to arrange this one plate, and that is with it off, and this is okay. This is not bad. It's certainly better than one we were looking at just a moment ago, but not the best as far as arrangement goes. So if I click this on and then close this window and now do a Shift A, everything's close together. So stringing happens because you've extruded the filament into the hot end. That sublimation's happening, which it's making everything expand. And when it expands, it is pushing out of your extruder. So it's oozing. And if you're not actively printing something, that oozing turns into strings. By having things closer together like this, the distance the print head needs to move from one object to the next is much smaller and shorter. So that time is shorter, and you're going to get a lot less stringing. Where you are going to see stringing is, so if it's moving, if it's on this elevon and then it's done printing and it moves to this elevon, you're going to see as that print head moved between the two objects, that stringing happens because the oozing is happening. So you're going to get a lot of stringing specifically right here. Don't worry about that. That's okay. That's meant to happen. We can't remove it completely, but with these techniques that I'm going over today, that comes off relatively easy. Usually in one stroke, I typically use a razor blade to get rid of most of my strings. So high stringing, there's a goal we're gonna have. If I am cleaning this up, I typically use my fingernail to eliminate or remove little strings like this. On a big one like this, I use one of those utility knives that extend out far. They're maybe 4 or 5 inches long, and they have the little blades you can snap off. I'll take the whole thing out and just run it down this whole line, and almost all of that comes off. And I use that same razor blade to clean inside fuselages. That's difficult to reach. My razor blade's pretty long, with the handle is probably close to 9 inches, and I can get it in more than half the way this way, and then I'll flip it over and do back the other way. So that's how I clean off my prints. On printing, you're going to get a lot of first layer stringing, so it's important to make sure we do eliminate that stringing as much as possible, because it's going to mess with adhesion and it might mess up your print as well. So this was an earlier print of mine, much improved now. It's much cleaner. I don't have an image of what it looks like now, but it is much cleaner, and I'm really happy with it. So let's talk about strength for a second. When it comes to planes, RC planes specifically, and 3D printed ones, we want to make sure they are lightweight, but they're also strong. So when it comes to 3D printing, there's 2 ways to do that. And the first way is your layer height. I do use 0.28. 3D printing, FDM specifically, the weak points are between the layers. So the less layers you have, the better. Since these planes are relatively large, I don't notice a difference at all in how the plane looks between 0.08 millimeters and 0.28 millimeters. Prints come out basically the same to me, especially with that sublimated lightweight PLA. It's expanding, so this is going to get you quicker prints and stronger prints. And then the second part of strength is going to be how many walls or layers and infill. So I typically use one wall, and that one wall is actually 2 walls sandwiched by an infill. So I use 1 wall. I do use 2 top and 2 bottom. I know a lot of other people use 1. I prefer 2. I notice when I glue parts together, Seems to be a better, more solid feel. And if I do crash it, I can cut it off, and often one of my layers is still there. Allows me to sand my parts at those if need be too when I crash and replace. And then for infill, I'm lazy, so I print the entire plane in 3% infill with gyroid. Gyroid is the strongest in all 3 dimensions infill to date that I'm aware of. I've watched a lot of videos. Lightning's technically lighter and stronger, but only in one direction, not in all 3 directions. And for an RC airplane, we want it strength in all 3 dimensions. You can have different infills for different parts. I would recommend control surfaces. You want them stiffer, so you either want higher infill or another wall loop. I wouldn't go beyond 2. 2 is getting heavy. 2 wall loops with lightweight foaming, with active lightweight foaming, will be lighter than regular PLA still, but obviously quite a bit heavier, I think like 20% heavier or 30% depending on the part, than one wall. So if you need a lot of strength, 2 walls is definitely stronger than one wall. That's the way to go. If you just need a little more strength, I might bump this up. But like I said, I print the entire planes this way. 1 wall, 2 top, 2 bottom, 3% gyroid. Prints are super strong and great. And lastly is, this is sort of related, infill combination. So when it's printing the infill on the inside, it prints them with less layers, if you will. And those less layers are thicker, it's going to be stronger. So those are all the settings as far as that. Who are the brands for this active foaming lightweight PLA that are typically used? What you're looking at here is, if I can pull my camera back on, there it is. 3D Lab Print. I like it. This is their dark, it's called, which is like a gray. It looks like a black before it's printed, and then as it's printed, it lightens up a little bit. All of their colors lighten up a little bit as you print them. At least the 3D Lab prints do. There's Bamboo Lab makes a product called Aero. That's an active foaming lightweight PLA. And then ColorFab is another one. ColorFab actually has 2 products. They have a lightweight PLA, and then they have a lightweight PLA HT, which I believe stands for high temperature. And that high temperature product of theirs, if you live in a warmer climate, should help reduce warping, especially if you're printing in darker colors or live in a really hot climate. You might want to consider that ColorFab lightweight PLA HT. So yeah, that stringing really happens because it's sublimating, which on purpose, that gives us the air inside of it. The ways to reduce it are keep your print head printing at one time. Ways to do that: move all your parts together, only print one part at a time. If I show you here, this is the settings that I use at all times. Hold on, where is it? To all prints, nope. Single item, there it is. So this is my standard settings, but it's one print, and as you can see, it's very clean. There's a little bit of stringing, but because that print head didn't have to move around and let it ooze in the meantime, there's no stringing. It's a very clean print, and it's actually multicolored too, so it is much cleaner, less cleanup if you print one item at a time, whether you're vase or standard printing, doesn't matter. However, again, I like to protect my time and not babysit the printer and come back to it every 15 minutes to an hour. I would much prefer to print, if I could, 12, 13 hours at a time and come back and take all the parts off and then print more. Your print speed does matter. This is actually PET G, and you can see this is shiny and this is more matte. This PET G is shinier here due to the print speed. So the printer actually will slow down as it was doing this section. So print speed does matter, not only to is it matte or shiny, but also is it stronger. So if you are having strength issues, I would first look at temperature and flow rate, but you also might want to consider slowing things down. Today's printers are getting so fast that the hot end is the issue right now. So you really need an upgraded hot end like a CHT or a Obsidian, I think is another one that makes one for Bamboo Labs. It's okay for lightweight PLA, but once you start getting into PETG or TPU, it really becomes the bottleneck as far as print speeds go. So I wanted to talk about that and your finish. Here's what gyroid looks like as you're printing it. Let me zoom in a little here. As opposed to a grid infill. So this gyroid is much stronger in all 3 dimensions than any other infill, and it's actually pretty fast too. This was a grid infill, so I used to use grid infill, and this was prior to me changing my stringing settings, so you can see it's actually quite a bit more string than what we're seeing today. So get them close together, all your objects as close as you can. Try and orientate, if they're all wings or elevons or anything like flat and tall, try and get them all oriented in the same direction. Orientation absolutely does matter. And I try and get as much on the plate as possible, but again, depends. How much time do you have and how many printers do you have? I guess if you had if I had the money and space for 20 P1Ss, I would print them all individually. Or if I was only ever printing one plane, yeah, I would probably print all the parts individually. Brims, I do like to use brims, especially for any taller objects. So if I was printing these, I would use brims. If I was printing these wing parts, even though there is a fuselage on that plate, I would also use brims. These I would use brims. I would probably not use brims on the red one. Maybe I would because of the nacelle, but certainly if it was just these fuselage parts, I probably would not use brims. When I am printing, I'm typically printing on the Bamboo Lab default. Hey, my print's done. And you can see there's some oozing right there. So that is that sublimated filament, and because it wasn't printing anything, it stopped extruding, but it oozes out. But I do print on the Bamboo Labs stock textured PEI plate. It's great. Brim definitely helps for those taller, skinnier objects. I don't use a glue stick. Sometimes I'll use hairspray, especially if I'm printing. Like, I definitely use hairspray on this plate, probably on this plate, probably on this plate. So those tall, skinny objects, I'll use hairspray. I don't need it all the time. I clean my plate maybe once every 2 or 3 prints, typically with high percentage isopropyl alcohol, but that doesn't always work either. So about every 5 to 10 prints, I use Dawn dish detergent. There are no oils in that. That will be residual and weaken your print. Try and keep your fingers, because there's oil in your skin, try not touch the top of your surface plate in between prints unless you're going to be cleaning it anyway. Oils obviously make things not want to stick as well. And that's it. I hope everyone got some good information out of this. If you have any tips, suggestions, or improvements, please let me know. And happy flying.